Welcome everyone. If somebody could just say hi in the chat so I know that you can hear me. Awesome. Thank you. Get started in just a minute. All right, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. I hope you enjoyed the previous presentation. I know we're going at this one right after another, but I don't want to hold anybody super late, and we got a lot of stuff that I'd like to cover to get us ready. So, welcome. Introduction to red and blue teaming and pen testing methodologies. So real quick, what is pen testing? Pen testing refers to the idea of it stands for penetration testing, so that includes penetrating a network or a system to gain unauthorized access. Now, pen testing is usually a red teaming activity. So in this case, we have a red and blue team. A red team will usually refer to somebody who is trying to gain access through pen testing means to gain privilege on a system. Now this includes, everybody knows the white hat, gray hat, black hat hackers. This is all included in red team. The network for unusual activity, and they also go through and block and make sure that their systems are secure. Fourth battle. So your red teamers will be constantly trying to attack a system. You never know who your red teamer is going to be. It could be a white hat hacker who, has gotten permission from their own company, and a lot of times the blue team has no idea. It's usually the managers who know. The blue team has no idea that previous knowledge that includes like passwords about the systems or how they're set up. They're usually coming from the outside. Now there are exceptions to this case. They may be doing some sort of internal penetration testing. This is usually only for really big companies who have really secure data where they need to protect it inside and out. So I want to cover the 5 general steps of exploitation. So we're going to be focusing on the red and the blue team for each of these steps and what it means to be red and blue on either side of using these steps, with the exception of, I believe, the first step. That is more of just a red teaming thing. So there's information gathering, so gathering information about this is a very, very, very general term. It can mean anything from just looking at their website and seeing what's posted there, to looking at how the website was built, maybe like a GitHub, if they have it posted on GitHub. If you're looking at a piece of software that's publicly available, maybe you're trying to attack that. Um, this is information gathering. I don't want to go too much into it because I've already got slides for it. Enumeration scanning. So this is an active attack where you're actually scanning the network to see what you're usually checking for ports that are open. Exploitation. This is the phase where you're actually exploiting security vulnerabilities. Privilege escalation. This means that once you've already gained access to the system, usually you're not a privileged user. So you can't just type sudo and it'll run whatever you need. A lot of times sudo is blocked, especially if they're a mostly correctly configured system. And then post-exploitation. We'll cover that a little bit as it's not super important for the King of the Hill competition, but this is usually only relevant to gray and black hat hackers. A lot of times, if you access a system, you may need to get back into that system afterwards. So if they restart their computer or something. White hat hackers might do this in case they need more time to pivot, or there's like a system that constantly restarts, but this is mostly a gray and black hat thing. So information gathering. So this is a passive way. So anytime you are actively trying to exploit the system, look at data that isn't publicly available, this is information gathering. Once you actually send stuff like on an in-map scan, you're in the enumeration and scanning phase. Now, for King of the Hill competitions, you generally don't need much information gathering, but in real-world exploitation, in your publicly available websites that aren't supposed to be publicly available, you'll also see version numbers of specific applications that they might be running that might be vulnerable. Google dorking. This is the idea of if anybody has tried to look for a PDF on Google, that's an example of Google dorking. So you're using search engine features to get some sort of result that you're looking for, mainly through Google. One thing that they used to, I'm sure it still happens, is that there are certain types of MySQL errors that could lead to a vulnerability. And what they would do is that they would actually search for that error in Google, and then they would be able to pull up the website and exploit that error. So very common first step is to look at a website, look around the website and stuff like that. This for website exploitation anyway. Web Appalizer, it analyzes web apps to get version numbers. So it's just an app that you install in your browser that will give you the ability to basically analyze a page and get version numbers of stuff that they're using based off of how the page is laid out. This can be useful if there's certain applications that are vulnerable to certain things. Knowing which version number is very important. Maltego, I won't go over it too much. It's basically a program that will scour the internet for certain things. It's similar to another program, I can't remember the name of it. It would basically go through Facebook lists and just go through one person and then go to all their friends and all their friends and all their friends and collect data about them. Was an app. I think Maltego does that. I haven't used it. It's a paid program, but it's very popular in the pen testing space for information gathering. So enumeration and scanning. This is probably going to be your first step in the process of actually doing an exploit. So you would use something like Nmap, which we're going to cover tomorrow, to scan a computer to get information about the network. So this will tell you which ports are open, And when a port is open, that means that it's actively accepting traffic. So if you're going to connect to a port and you're trying to exploit it, then you need to know what's running on it so that you can look that up and see what's wrong with it, or see what possible security vulnerabilities there are. Um, and Nmap, a lot of the times will give you the version numbers and everything, so you can just type in Google like, is there any security vulnerabilities for this specific version of this specific software. Mass scan is another popular tool. I think there's a newer version that's supposed to be even faster, but it's basically like Nmap, but like on steroids. So it can scan the entire internet in 10 minutes, I think it said. It's very fast. It can scan a lot of networks very quickly and detect if they're up and running. Not something you would use on an internal network because it's very nasty and very loud, which means that your SOC would probably notice like, hey, something's going on. Whereas Nmap, um, depending on how you run it, would likely not show up. So on the blue side of this, you are generally going to have to check which services are running, make sure that those services are up to date, so that they can't just look up the service version and they need to do more digging. You can obscure the service version. Generally, security by obscurity is not usually recommended, but it is an option. It will make hackers' life harder. Um, so your firewall, most people I imagine are aware of what a firewall is. So a firewall will basically open and close ports on your computer. So if your firewall is open on ports and like there's applications running on it that are accepting input, that could be a vulnerability. Blocking all ports um, that aren't needed for communication outside the computer is um, generally recommended. But a lot of vulnerabilities come from opening a port that might be needed, and then there's an old version of a program running on it that is out of date and has a vulnerability. That's the most common thing you'll see in King of the Hills. So LSOF is another tool. We won't be going over that, but you can look it up. LSOF gives you all of the running, all of the applications on your computer that are listening for data. It's a pretty neat tool. Usually the first thing that you'll run when you're trying to check which ports are open. You can also use netstat. That's another popular command for that. And that also works on Windows. So the exploitation phase. So this is the fun part. This is where you get into actually gaining the access that you want and being able to, get the data that you need, or if you're black hat, destroy the system. We're assuming that you're white hat in this case. So a lot of the times you are just trying to gain unauthorized privilege so that you can sort of write this down, give it to the person that you are working with to test their security. Or you would write it down and try hack me. You would basically just put it on, you would find a flag once you've exploited it. But exploits use vulnerabilities to gain more access. So exploitation could be anything from, it doesn't have to be a shell. You don't need to have like full access to a system. An exploitation could be something as simple as just getting something that you're not supposed to have. So some sort of unauthorized information. That could be even getting a version number of a piece of software that's not supposed to be publicly available could count as an exploit in some cases. So exploitation is a very broad term. Common tools that Red Hats usually use, Metasploit. It's one of the popular script kiddie applications, so a lot of pre-built-in vulnerability exploits are built in for that. In the real world, you won't see a lot of Metasploit. Um, they call them modules that can be actively exploited in the wild. But in our Try Hack Me sessions, a lot of the times you will. And it's completely possible, especially on internal networks, that you'll see vulnerabilities that are exploited by Metasploit. But Metasploit takes all of the most popular vulnerabilities and combines them into one application. And this is combined with a program called ExploitDB. ExploitDB is a database. You can actually go online right now. It's a website. And this gives you all of you can search up version numbers of specific software to get more information about that software. And tells you exploits. It even gives you software. It actually will give you the program code to exploit that. A lot of times it's in Python, and you can just download, you just copy it and run it on your system. But Metasploit does that too as well. So the blue side, it's important to understand that there will always be exploits, no matter how secure your system is, with the exception of literally blocking off every single port on every single computer, which makes them almost pointless to have. There will always be exploits. But the important thing is you want to keep from the most obvious exploits. It's all about the level of security. So a if you're a hospital who has a lot of very, very secure and private information, you may have a huge team making sure that all of its data is secure and accessible and monitoring it constantly. But if you are a team, if you're really small, it's a personal website or something like that, you may only need to worry about primary exploits such as, old software versions. So it's important to assess the level of risk, and that will determine which type of exploits you should aim to resolve. In the COTH, in the King of the Hill competition, that'll usually be pretty obvious, and you'll be exploiting them first, so you'll already know what the vulnerabilities are. But keep in mind, if you patch one hole, there will be another hole that will probably open up. So, or assuming that patching one hole, don't assume that the other holes will be patched, I guess is a better phrase. Common tools, Knox. Knox isn't a tool, but it's an idea. So Network Operations Center, scanning, automated scanning using something like Qualys is a very popular tool to go through and scan networks. It's kind of like Nmap, but a lot more powerful because it looks through actual exploits and tells network operation centers what's going on. It also is usually installed on the systems themselves, so they can actually look and see if there's some misconfiguration. And then OpsView and Splunk are just popular monitoring and logging tools. The last step, we will actually be covering this step all on its own tomorrow, is privilege escalation. So privilege escalation is the idea of once you've actually gained access to the system, you need to be able to, a lot of times you need more access to the system. With the exception is if you're trying to pivot. This is very common if you're attacking a large corporate Rust scan. Is that like a big mass? Is that like a mass scan alternative? A lot of corporate networks, you'll have an entry point that you'll attack, and if you gain access to that, you may not be able to get higher privilege, and that's okay on a big corporate network, because once you get privilege to, say, just the initial system, initial foothold, you can actually, usually, the internal network is significantly less secure than the external network. So at this point, you can pivot. This is the idea of switching between different computers. Because you have access to one system, this likely will give you access to more systems. And you can pivot from there and gain higher privilege on another system, even if you can't get it on the same system. On the red team, usually you will have common misconfigurations, not necessarily sorry, not necessarily misconfigurations, because, for example, a lot of people don't like typing sudo whenever they're typing in commands, especially if there's a normal user using the Linux box. Um, like they'll enable passwordless sudo, so you can literally just type sudo. Another common thing that you'll see is, for example, like backups. A lot of times they'll execute backups uh, with certain users, and those users will have temporary admin permissions. Or I know there was a lot of times I won't be explaining buffer overflows too much, but you'll definitely learn about it in your CS classes. Um, but you can actually exploit low level overflows in memory on programs that are running locally because you have more access to those programs. Um, so attackers will commonly see see these vulnerabilities, and that's why there's examples such as linps and winps. Um, these stand for Linux Privilege Escalation and Access. I know Linux and Windows Privilege Escalation. I don't know what AS stands for. Um, but these are automated tools that just run through thousands, yeah, at least 100 different actual um, uh, pieces, parts of a Linux system that could be exploitable, and checks like thousands of different files for incorrect possible permissions. And because it's so common, usually linps or winps will basically guarantee you privilege escalation on a king of the hill. Now, on more secure networks, again, it might be a little bit harder, obviously. Um, uh, so yeah, on the blue team, uh, your blue team usually focuses on the previous slide, so exploitation. If a user has already exploited a system, um, you're relying on the security of the internal network. So again, you'll have your Nox, your OpsView, Splunk for monitoring. Um, they they will usually will be monitoring the networks, monitoring the internal networks, but generally the security is a lot less, and that's necessary actually a lot of the times, because like I said, for the backups, it's important to have that user set up for executing that command, uh, and it can be really difficult to go through. It's pretty easy to go through and check all the ports on a computer and check the services, but it's really hard to check every single program on every single computer to make sure that it's not vulnerable. So many times, privilege escalation is pretty hard to combat. It usually starts with exploitation. And really quickly, I want to go over post exploitation. So post exploitation, once you've gained access to the system, and if you're not pivoting, if this includes pivoting. So if you're trying to access other systems, you would pivot at this point. Um, but post exploitation, if you're looking at like black hat hackers, a lot of times they'll leave like ransomware. So like WannaCry is an example of a post exploitation tool. So they've already exploited the system. Now they're just using it for something else. They may extract data. So if they try to extract data, for example, in a King of the Hill competition, you'll be extracting flags, which are basically just files that you can read out and get that flag and put it into the box. If you are, a white hat hacker, at this point, you would do a write up, looking at what you've done so far, how you've done it, and what you've noticed, and then you would send this to the company. Blue hat, blue team. Back to what I was saying originally. If you if you have, um, they're going to be focused on the initial foothold, blocking that initial foothold, and then watching traffic, and watching users usually, to make sure that they're not trying to pivot. So this is a common way that they'll see, like, okay, wait a second, a user logged into this system that's never logged into the system before. And then they move to another system from that system. That's a pretty obvious, like, obviously somebody is pivoting. Now, there is a lot of things going around nowadays with ransomware and how companies should handle that. There are actual teams of people who work. Usually, they work for several companies, um, but these people will actually come in after a big attack and uh, actually look at what happened, look at logs, look at backups, and try to help them fix it. Um, this is where post exploitation usually results in. Is you have a big team coming in fixing a lot of issues. But like I said, I won't be focusing on this too much because it's not important for the King of the Hill competition. Now our last slide. Now it's your turn. So there is another room, pen testing fundamentals. It will also be linked in the description. After we show you how to set up your environment this evening, you will be able to go ahead and access this room and be able to uh, and actually test out like your pen testing fundamentals. You'll see a lot of things I actually copied from that. So you'll get to practice that a little bit. Um, now, uh, now I don't have much time. If anybody has any questions, let me know. But we are getting. It is time to move over to our distinguished speaker, Professor Jason Palakis. So if you are in the Discord, make sure you should have the Zoom link at this point. Go ahead and join the Zoom, and I will see you there.